He called off our wedding in front of 400 people. He said my name like it was a mistake he was correcting. And the worst part? I didn't cry. I just stood there in that white hanbok-inspired suit, holding flowers I had picked myself, thinking, I always knew. I should have seen it coming. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. The way Junho stopped reaching for my hand in public 6 months before the wedding. The way his scent changed, colder, more distant, like pine slowly losing its warmth. The way he would answer my calls on the second ring instead of the first, and then eventually not at all unless I texted twice. But I was 24 and in love, or at least I thought I was. And when you are young and in love and an Omega who has spent his entire life being told he is too much, too sharp, too stubborn, too unwilling to soften his edges for an alpha's comfort, you hold on. You hold on because someone finally chose you. Because someone finally looked at you and said, you are enough. Except Junho never actually said that. I realize that now. My name is Cha Min-jae. I was born in Seattle, Washington, to a Korean mother who made the best doenjang jjigae in the Pacific Northwest, and a father who believed silence was the highest form of dignity. I grew up understanding two things fluently: English and the language of holding yourself together in public no matter what is falling apart inside you. I am an Omega, unregistered technically because my parents believed that in America you got to decide what label the world put on you. But biology does not care about your parents' politics. My secondary gender presented at 17, quiet and stubborn like everything else about me. No dramatic heat spiral. No sudden submission. Just a slow, bone-deep awareness that I was built to feel everything at a frequency most people could not hear. I took suppressants for 2 years. Then I stopped because I decided I was done apologizing for existing in my own skin. That decision, ironically, is what brought Junho to me. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in Capitol Hill, the kind of trendy Korean fusion restaurant where the menu is in English but the guilt-tripping from the owner's grandmother is entirely in Korean. He was sitting 3 seats away, and the moment I walked past him, his head turned. Not dramatically, just a slow, involuntary rotation like a compass finding north. I noticed. I always notice things. But I kept walking. He followed me to the water station. "Your scent," he said, and then stopped himself like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" I asked. He smiled. It was a good smile. The kind that makes you forget, briefly, that you have excellent judgment and a long memory. We dated for 2 years. He was the eldest son of the Seo family, old money, quiet influence, the kind of Korean-American dynasty that owns 3 buildings in Bellevue and donates to university endowments with the practiced casualness of people who have never worried about rent. His family was alpha-dominant, traditional in the ways that mattered to them and modern in the ways that benefited them. They did not love me. But Junho wanted me, and in the Seo family, what the heir wanted was eventually tolerated. The engagement was announced over a dinner I was not invited to plan. The wedding date was selected by his mother. The venue, a ballroom in a 5-star hotel downtown Seattle, was booked before I even saw a ring. I told myself it was cultural. I told myself it was just how his family operated. I told myself a lot of things. The morning of the wedding, I stood in a side room off the main hall, adjusting the collar of my suit in a mirror that was slightly too tall for me. My best friend, Park Soo-hyun, was fixing my boutonniere and talking too fast about nothing, the way he always does when he is nervous and trying not to show it. "You look good," he said. "I look like someone who ironed his own suit at 6 in the morning because the hotel's pressing service was fully booked," I said. He laughed, but it did not reach his eyes. I should have asked him what he knew. I should have asked him why his hands were slightly unsteady. I should have asked a lot of things. Instead, I walked down that aisle. 400 people. Flowers everywhere, white and pale gold. Junho's mother's choice. A string quartet playing something classical I did not recognize. And Junho standing at the altar in a charcoal suit, looking like a man rehearsing for a role he had decided not to take. I reached him. I smiled. He did not smile back. And then he spoke. Not to me at first. To the room. Loudly, clearly, with the composed authority of a man who had been raised to command attention and never questioned whether he deserved it. "I'm sorry," he said. But I can't do this. The quartet stopped. I stood very still. Min-jae. He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes was not cruelty. It was relief. The specific relief of someone putting down a weight they had been carrying out of obligation rather than love. You deserve honesty. This isn't right for me. I'm sorry. For 100 people. Complete silence. My bouquet, white chrysanthemums, I had chosen myself because they meant honesty in the Korean floral tradition, and I had thought that was poetic, still in my hands. I did not cry. I looked at him for a long moment, long enough that a few people in the front row shifted uncomfortably. Then I set the bouquet down on the altar step, carefully, like it deserved to be placed gently even if nothing else in that room did. Okay, I said, and I walked out. Not because I was not breaking, but because I had my mother's dignity running through my blood, and I was not going to give 400 strangers, or Co Junho, the satisfaction of watching me shatter. I would do that alone. I always do everything alone. What I did not know yet, what I could not have known standing in that marble lobby with my heart quietly caving in, was that my story was not ending. It was only just beginning to get complicated. He humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. But 3 years later, when 3 sets of identical dark eyes looked up at him from a park bench in Portland, Oregon, Co Junho would learn that walking away from me was the most expensive decision he ever made. The marble lobby of the Cascade Grand Hotel was exactly the kind of place designed to make you feel small when you were already bleeding. High ceilings, chandelier the size of a small planet. Staff in pressed uniforms who had clearly been trained to look helpful without making eye contact with people who were visibly having the worst day of their lives. A fountain in the center that trickled with the cheerful indifference of something that had never once been left at an altar. I stood just inside the main doors, still holding absolutely nothing because I had left my bouquet on those altar steps like the dramatically composed person I was, and I took one slow breath. Then another. Okay, Min-jae. Inventory. You are standing in a hotel lobby in your wedding suit with 400 people approximately 40 seconds behind you. Your phone is in the bridal suite on the 14th floor. Your wallet is also in the bridal suite. Your best friend is probably still frozen in the 3rd row trying to decide whether to follow you or stay and explain things to your relatives. You have $0, 0 transportation, and apparently 0 functioning romantic instincts. Great. Fantastic. Thriving. I started walking toward the elevator bank. Not because I had a plan, but because standing still felt like surrender and I was constitutionally opposed to surrender. The elevator doors opened before I pressed the button. And that is when it happened. 3 men walked out. Not in a dramatic, slow-motion, cinematic way. In the completely ordinary way that people exit elevators, mid-conversation, slightly distracted, carrying the quiet authority of people who own the air around them without trying to. But the scent. Oh no. It hit me before I could prepare for it, before I could build any kind of rational wall against it. Not 1 scent. 3. Layered and distinct and devastating in entirely different ways, like 3 movements of the same overwhelming piece of music. The first was dark and grounding, sandalwood and rain-soaked cedar, something that made my hindbrain go very, very quiet in a way that was deeply inconvenient. The second was sharper, electric, like the air before a thunderstorm rolls in over Puget Sound. And the third was warmer, almost sweet, like burnt caramel with something dangerous underneath. Alpha, 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 triple. I stopped walking. They stopped talking. For approximately 2 full seconds, the 4 of us existed in a bizarre suspended silence in the middle of a hotel lobby while a fountain trickled cheerfully nearby. Then the one in the center, the one who smelled like dark cedar and quiet devastation, looked at me with the expression of a man who had just walked into a wall he did not know was there. He was tall. They were all tall, actually, in that unfair way that identical people tend to amplify each other's best features simply by existing in proximity. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, the kind of composed stillness that either meant excellent emotional regulation or absolutely terrifying things happening below the surface. He was wearing a charcoal suit, not unlike the one currently making my morning significantly worse, and he had a small scar above his left eyebrow that his 2 brothers did not share. The one on the left had the storm electricity scent and was looking at me with open, unguarded curiosity, like I was something interesting that had appeared on his itinerary without warning. The one on the right, the warm caramel one, was already almost smiling, which felt deeply inappropriate given that I had just been publicly humiliated and was radiating the specific emotional frequency of a person who needed approximately no additional complications today. They are identical, I thought. Of course they are identical. Why would today be simple? You're blocking the elevator, the caramel one said pleasantly. You're blocking my path to a very important emotional breakdown, I said. So I guess we're both having a morning. The curious one on the left blinked. Then he made a sound that was almost a laugh, quickly controlled. The cedar one in the center had still not looked away from me. His nostrils had flared once, barely perceptibly, and something in his expression had gone very still in the specific way that alphas go still when their instincts are working faster than their manners. I recognized that look. I did not have the bandwidth for that look today. Excuse me, I said and moved to step around them. Wait, it was the cedar one. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that was not accustomed to being ignored, and I felt it somewhere in my sternum in a way I deeply resented. I stopped. Not because the voice commanded me to, I want to be very clear about that, but because something in the quality of it was genuinely startling. Not aggressive, not possessive, almost confused, like the word had left his mouth before he decided to say it. I turned and looked at him with the full weight of a man who had already used up his patience for the day before 10 in the morning. I'm going to stop you right there, I said. Whatever your instincts are telling you right now, today is genuinely not the day. I just walked out of my own wedding. I have no phone, no money, and I'm wearing flowers I chose myself for symbolic reasons that are now extremely ironic. So unless you are about to hand me a cab fare and a strong opinion about Dunjang Jigi, I need you to let whatever that was go. Silence. The caramel one was definitely smiling now. He was trying not to, but he was losing badly. The curious one on the left had turned fully toward me with the focused attention of someone filing away every word I said for later reference. And the cedar one. He looked at me for a long moment with those dark, unreadable eyes, and something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly. More like recalibration. Like a person who had walked in expecting one kind of conversation and was now quietly revising their entire approach. Kwon Taeyang, he said finally. Just his name. Offered flat and clean, no embellishment. I did not ask, I said. Kwon Taeyang. The curious one helpfully. Also did not ask, I said. Kwon Taeyang. The caramel one now fully smiling. And for what it's worth, I think you're handling this remarkably well. I am handling this the exact right amount, I said. The breakdown is scheduled for later. I have a system. That made Taehyun laugh. Actually laugh, short and genuine, quickly covered with a fist against his mouth like he was trying to maintain some kind of professional dignity. I looked at the three of them standing there. Identical faces, three completely different energies, all of them watching me with the specific quality of attention that made the back of my neck warm in a way my body had absolutely no right to do right now. My suppressants had been low for 2 weeks. I had planned to refill them after the honeymoon. That plan, along with approximately everything else I had organized for the next phase of my life, had just been rendered completely irrelevant. Which meant my scent was probably doing things I could not control. Perfect. Wonderful. This is fine. Well, I said, with the dignified composure of a man whose entire morning had been a controlled disaster. It was lovely to almost meet you. I have an elevator to catch and a life to completely rebuild, so I turned back toward the elevator. The 14th floor button sticks, Taeyang said behind me. You have to press it twice. I paused with my hand on the elevator frame. How do you know I'm going to the 14th floor? The bridal suites are on 14. A beat. We're staying on 14. I closed my eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Of course they are. Thank you for the tip, I said, and stepped inside. The doors began to close. Through the narrowing gap, I saw Tizio raise one hand in a small wave, still smiling. Taehyun was watching me with that focused, cataloging attention. And Taeyang, Kwon Taeyang, cedar and rain and deep inconvenient quiet, was just standing there, looking at me with an expression I could not name and did not have time to decode. The doors closed. I leaned back against the elevator wall and stared at the ceiling. My scent, some clear-eyed part of my brain, noted with the calm of someone assessing structural damage after a storm. They caught my scent, all three of them, and that was not just curiosity on their faces. The elevator hummed upward. My heart was doing something it had no business doing 30 minutes after I walked out of my own wedding. No, I told it firmly. Absolutely not. We are not doing this. We just left one disaster. We are not immediately walking into 3 more. The elevator reached 14 with a soft chime. But even as I thought it, I could still smell them. Cedar, storm, and caramel. Like they had followed me into a space they had no right to occupy. And the worst part? Part of me did not want the scent to fade. My hand was not entirely steady when I did. I stared at that small illuminated button like it had personally offended me, which was unfair because it was just a button doing its job, unlike certain people I had spent 2 years planning a future with. The elevator opened onto the 14th floor with a soft, unbothered chime. The hallway was long and carpeted in deep charcoal gray, lined with warm sconce lighting that made everything look expensive and hushed. The kind of hallway that absorbed sound and stress equally, designed for people who paid enough money to believe their problems stayed in the lobby. My problems had apparently taken the same elevator. I walked to room 1402, the bridal suite, and stood in front of the door for a moment. The little gold numbers were slightly crooked. I had not noticed that this morning when I left, full of carefully managed optimism and freshly pressed linen. I noticed it now because my brain was doing what it always does under pressure, cataloging small irrelevant details to avoid processing the large relevant ones. Like the fact that my wedding just dissolved in under 4 minutes of public speaking. Or the fact that somewhere below me, 3 identical alphas were probably stepping back into whatever their morning had been before I walked into it like a small emotional grenade. I pressed my keycard to the door. It beeped green. The suite was exactly as I had left it 3 hours ago, which felt both wrong and deeply unfair. The garment bag hanging by the wardrobe, empty now. The small tray of traditional Korean wedding cookies Suhyun had brought as a joke that was not entirely a joke, still wrapped in pale gold paper. My phone on the nightstand, screen lit up with approximately 47 notifications that I could see from the doorway without my glasses. I walked in and picked it up. Suhyun had called 6 times. My mother had called twice, which meant she already knew and was giving me space in the specifically Korean way of not calling a 3rd time but absolutely expecting me to call back before the hour was up. There were texts from cousins, from college friends, from a number I did not recognize that had sent only a string of question marks, which was somehow the most accurate summary of my morning. And one text from Junho. I'm sorry, Minjae. You deserved better than how I handled that. I hope you know it was never about you not being enough. I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down on the nightstand with the careful, deliberate calm of a man who had made a personal commitment to not throw anything today. It was never about you not being enough, right? That was supposed to make me feel better. That was the version of sorry that was more about his own comfort than mine, wrapped in considerate language and delivered after the fact, the way people return something they borrowed only after you have already replaced it yourself. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was very good. Junho's family had chosen this hotel, this suite, this mattress, this entire aesthetic, and somehow I had let myself believe that because I was included in the plan. I had a hand in building it. That, I thought clearly, is what I am not doing again. I started changing out of my suit. Not dramatically, not with the kind of symbolic weight a lesser storyteller would put on it. Practically, button by button, because it was a good suit and I had paid for it myself and I was going to hang it properly before I packed it into my bag and figured out what came next. I was reaching for the shirt I had arrived in when someone knocked on my door. I froze. Suhyun, I told myself. Obviously Suhyun. Who else would it be? It's open? I called. Because my keycard was still in my hand and Suhyun knew the room number. The door opened. It was not Suhyun. Kwon Taeyang stood in my doorway in the same charcoal suit, holding a small paper bag from the hotel cafe with the slightly uncomfortable expression of a man who had done something on instinct and was now facing the full consequences of that decision in real time. We looked at each other. "Wrong room," I said. "No, it's not," he said. "I'm going to need you to be wrong about that." He held up the paper bag slightly. "You said you had no money. The cafe downstairs makes a decent juk." I thought. He stopped. Recalibrated. "It was a bad idea." He said that last part with the honesty of someone who had talked himself into something reasonable sounding downstairs and was only now, standing in the actual doorway of an actual person's actual room, hearing how it landed. I leaned against the wardrobe and looked at him. He was still in the doorway, not stepping in, not pushing, just standing there with a paper bag of rice porridge and the slightly pained expression of a man whose instincts had written a check his manners were not sure they could cash. "Cedar, my trader nose reported helpfully. Rain. Deep and grounding and completely inconvenient. You brought me juk," I said. "I did. Because I said I had no money. And because you walked out of your own wedding approximately 20 minutes ago, and the hotel cafe was the only place open on this floor." He paused. "Also, Tisio bet me I wouldn't actually come up here, and I have a complicated relationship with being told I won't do something." I stared at him. Something moved in my chest. Not the big dramatic seismic thing. Something smaller and more dangerous. The specific warmth that happens when someone does something unexpectedly human and your defenses were not built to handle human, only grand gestures and careful disappointments. "That is," I said slowly, "the most honest explanation anyone has given me for anything in approximately 2 years. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one, there and gone. "You going to let me put this down somewhere?" he asked. "It's warm and my hand is starting to feel it through the bag." I considered him for a moment longer. Strong jaw, dark eyes, that small scar above his left eyebrow that had not been explained and that I was not going to ask about. Standing in a doorway with hot rice porridge, having apparently lost a bet to his own brother to get here. "The desk," I said. "And you can sit in the chair by the window. Not on the bed. The bed is a trauma zone currently." "Understood," he said, and walked in like a man who knew how to move through someone else's space without taking up more of it than he was offered. He set the bag on the desk. He sat in the chair by the window exactly as directed, which I noted and filed away, because men who follow spatial boundaries when they do not have to are worth noticing. I pulled out the container of jik. It was plain, with a small side of kimchi in a separate container, and it smelled like something my mother made on sick days and hard mornings. I sat on the edge of the bed and ate a spoonful. It was good. Warm and clean and simple, and my body registered it with the quiet gratitude of someone who had been running on anxiety and ceremony since 5 in the morning. "Thank you," I said, "because I was raised correctly." He nodded once. We sat in the strange, surprisingly not uncomfortable silence of two people who did not know each other and were both apparently fine with that for the moment. Outside the window, Seattle was doing its usual gray and gorgeous thing. Clouds sitting low over the skyline. The kind of morning that looked like the beginning of something even when it felt like an ending. "You're not going to ask me what happened?" I said. It was not a question. "No," he said. "Most people would ask. Most people are more interested in the story than the person." He glanced at me. "You don't look like you want to tell the story right now." I ate another spoonful of juk and thought about that. He was right. I did not want to explain Junho, or the 2 years, or the slow accumulation of small moments where I had chosen to reframe disappointment as patience. I did not want to perform the narrative of my own humiliation for a stranger's sympathy. I just wanted to eat warm food and sit in a quiet room and figure out which direction was forward. "You're in Seattle for business?" I asked, because redirecting was a skill I had cultivated extensively. "Conference," he said. 3 days. We leave Thursday." "What kind of conference?" "Medical. We're trauma surgeons." I looked up from my juk. 3 identical alpha trauma surgeons. Of course that was what was sitting in my window chair, eating up my composure one reasonable sentence at a time. "All 3 of you?" I asked. "Same residency. Different specializations. Taehyun does neuro, Tisio does pediatric, I do emergency." He said it plainly, no performance, the way people describe their work when it is genuinely who they are rather than what they want you to think of them. I pointed my spoon at him. That is either the most impressive thing I have heard today or a very elaborate elevator story. We get that a lot, he said. And there it was again, that almost smile. Stop, I told my chest firmly. We are not doing this. We are eating juk and recovering from a catastrophic morning, and this man is leaving Thursday, and we are not adding a single complication to this situation. My chest ignored me completely. Taeyang's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression shifted, just slightly, into something more careful. My brothers want to know if you need anything else, he said, with the tone of a man who knew exactly how that sentence sounded and was choosing honesty over dignity anyway. Your brothers, I said, are monitoring this situation? They're concerned. They don't know me. No. He looked at me directly, and something in his dark eyes was very steady and very serious in a way that made the back of my neck warm for an entirely different reason than chemistry. But your scent when you walked out of that elevator was the most distressed thing I have smelled in 3 years of working trauma, and we're not built to ignore that. The room went very quiet. Outside, Seattle clouds shifted and a thin line of winter light came through the window and landed somewhere between us on the carpet, pale and tentative. Like it was also not sure if it was welcome. I wanted to say something sharp and deflecting. I had approximately 4 good options ready. Instead, what came out was the truth. I'm fine, I said. I will be fine. I just need today to be over. Taeyang looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, simple and clean, accepting that answer without pushing against it. Okay, he said, and somehow that was the most devastating thing anyone had said to me all morning. Not the public rejection. Not Junho's careful apology text. Not the 400 witnesses or the abandoned chrysanthemums or the elevator button that stuck. Just one quiet okay from a man who smelled like cedar and rain and who had brought me juk because I mentioned I had no money, and who looked at me like I was a person whose answer deserved to be respected. I was in so much trouble. Whatever easy quiet we had built in that room was about to get complicated. I watched Taeyang's face do that careful thing again, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his jaw set just a fraction more than it had been a moment ago. He was reading something on his phone with the controlled expression of a man trained to receive bad news without visibly receiving it. I knew that expression. My father wore it every time something important was being held back. Problem? I asked. Nothing urgent, he said, which was exactly what people say when something is urgent but they have decided it is not your problem. He stood from the chair. Smooth, unhurried, the kind of movement that did not announce itself. He picked up his jacket from the arm of the chair where he had laid it without me noticing, which meant I had been paying less attention to practical details and more attention to his face than I was comfortable admitting. I should go, he said. You should. I agreed. Neither of us moved for exactly 2 seconds. Biology, I reminded myself. Suppressants low. Bad morning. Extremely inconvenient timing. These are the variables. This is not a feeling, this is a chemical response, and I am a person with a functioning prefrontal cortex and I am in charge here. My prefrontal cortex was doing its best. I respected the effort. Taeyang picked up the empty paper bag from the desk, looked around once like he was checking he had not left anything, and then looked at me. Portland, he said. I blinked. What? If you're leaving Seattle. He said it simply, no pressure behind it. Portland's a good city. Quieter. Easier to start something new without running into the thing you're leaving. I stared at him. You're recommending cities to me now. Taehyun lived there for a year during fellowship. He says the food scene is worth the rain. The ghost of the almost smile again. He's usually right about food. I did not know what to do with that. With the casual intimacy of being offered practical information about a city by a man I had known for 40 minutes, delivered with the gentle certainty of someone who simply wanted to be useful and had no agenda attached to it. I'll consider it, I said, because it was the most honest answer I had. He nodded, moved toward the door, and that is when my door opened from the outside before he reached it. Park Soo-hyun came through like a man who had been vibrating at a frequency above normal human function for the past half hour. He was still in his wedding guest suit, tie loosened, hair slightly disarranged, and he was carrying my coat, my small overnight bag, and the expression of someone who had rehearsed a speech in the elevator and was now revising it in real time upon finding a large unknown alpha standing in the middle of his best friend's hotel room. He stopped. He looked at Taeyang. He looked at me. He looked at the empty juk container on the desk. Okay, he said carefully. I have questions. I'm going to hold all of them because clearly there is a situation happening, but I want you to know they exist and they are many. Park Soo-hyun. I said. Kwon Taeyang. We met in the lobby. He brought food. He was just leaving. I was, Taeyang confirmed, with the composed ease of a man completely unbothered by being walked in on in a stranger's hotel room while holding a paper bag, which honestly was a level of social stability I found quietly impressive. Soo-hyun stepped aside from the doorway. Taeyang walked through it. At the threshold he paused and glanced back at me once, brief and direct. Take care of yourself, Cha Min-jae, he said. Then he was gone. The door clicked shut. Soo-hyun turned to me with the slow, precise energy of a man saving his reaction for maximum effect. That, he said, pointing at the closed door, was an alpha. Remarkable observation. A very large, very calm, very good-smelling alpha who was alone in your room with you 30 minutes after your wedding fell apart. He brought juk. He brought juk. Soo-hyun repeated, at a volume that suggested juk was now a significant plot point in the story of my life. Min-jae, he brought you comfort food. On your wedding day, after meeting you in a lobby. His brother bet him he wouldn't come up. Soo-hyun sat down in the window chair like his legs had made an independent decision. He pressed both hands to his face, took a breath, then lowered them and looked at me with the specific expression he reserved for moments when he felt the universe was doing something he needed to document. I came up here, he said, to help you pack, call you a car, and take you to my apartment to eat ramen and be furious about Junho in a safe environment. That sounds good, I said. Let's do that. And I still want to do that. He paused. But first you need to tell me your scent right now is just because your suppressants are low and not because something happened with the juk man. I picked up my overnight bag and started putting things into it with the focused efficiency of someone who was not going to answer that question directly. My suppressants are low, I said. That is a fact. I'm going to refill them this week. Min-jae. I'm packing, Soo-hyun. Cha Min-jae. I have known you since we were 11 years old, and you told our homeroom teacher her attendance policy was statistically ineffective and provided a chart. I know when you are deflecting. I folded my suit jacket, carefully, placed it in the bag. He's a trauma surgeon, I said. He's here for a conference. He leaves Thursday. He recommended Portland. Soo-hyun was quiet for a moment. Portland, he said, as a city, for a fresh start. Another moment of quiet. Outside the window, the Seattle clouds had thickened. The pale line of light that had briefly touched the carpet now gone. The room returned to its soft gray default. Junho's mother, Soo-hyun said, and his voice had shifted. The lightness gone. Something more careful in its place. I stopped packing. What about her? Soo-hyun looked at his hands. That was the tell. Soo-hyun only looked at his hands when he was about to say something he had been holding for longer than today. She knew, he said. Before. She knew Junho was going to do it. She let you plan the whole wedding, Min-jae. The venue, the catering, the flowers. She let you choose chrysanthemums. His voice tightened on that last word. She knew for at least a month and she let you believe everything was fine. The room was very quiet. I stood with my folded suit jacket in my hands and I let that sentence arrange itself properly in my understanding. She knew. Not a sudden decision. Not Junho waking up that morning with cold feet and a crisis of conviction. Someone had known. Someone had watched me discuss centerpieces and ceremony timing and the exact shade of white for the table linens. And that someone had said nothing. I set the jacket down on the bed. I sat next to it. I was not going to cry. I want to be clear about that. I was not going to cry over the Seo family's capacity for strategic silence because they were not worth that specific expenditure of salt water. But But I sat there for a moment and let myself feel the specific shape of it. The waste of it. 2 years of careful hope, and somewhere in the architecture of that hope there had been a wall I was never told about. My mother's voice, somewhere in my memory. Minjia, people show you who they are in what they choose not to say. I heard her. I just heard her late. How do you know? I asked. My voice was even. I was proud of that. Her assistant, Soo-hyun said quietly. We dated for 3 months last year. She texted me this morning. She felt guilty. Apparently the whole family knew Junho was in love with someone else. Has been for 8 months. The carpet was very detailed up close. A small geometric pattern, charcoal and gold, repeated precisely from one end of the room to the other. Someone else, I said. An alpha from his firm. They've apparently been. Soo-hyun stopped, chose his words. They've been together for most of the engagement. I nodded slowly. Outside, the first drops of Seattle rain began to appear on the window. Not dramatic, just the quiet, persistent kind that settles in and stays. Okay, I said. Min-jae. No, I mean it. I looked up at Soo-hyun and I meant every word of what came next. Okay, I needed to know that. Now I know it. And now I know that I spent 2 years optimizing for a relationship that was a placeholder, which is genuinely useful information because it means I don't have to wonder if I did something wrong. I didn't do something wrong. I was just in a story that was never actually mine. Soo-hyun looked at me for a long moment. You're terrifying, he said softly. I mean that as the highest compliment I have. I know you do. I picked up my jacket again, folded it again, placed it in the bag. Portland, I said. Soo-hyun blinked. What? I want to look at apartments in Portland. Not today. This week. I zipped the bag with clean finality. I need a city that doesn't have any furniture in it that someone else chose. Soo-hyun was quiet. Then he stood up, straightened his tie, and picked up my coat from where he had dropped it on entry. I know a good ramen place in Portland, he said. We could do a trip. Scout it out. See, I said, picking up my bag. This is why you're my best friend. I took one last look around the suite. The gold-wrapped cookies still on the tray. The crooked brass numbers on the door I could see reflected in the wardrobe mirror. The chair by the window where a man who smelled like cedar and rain had sat for 20 minutes and managed, without trying, to be the quietest and most decent part of my entire morning. I picked up the small wrapped cookie from the tray, put it in my coat pocket. I was not going to examine why. We walked out into the hallway. The 14th floor was quiet. Long charcoal carpet, warm sconce light, the muffled hush of other people's lives behind closed doors. We walked toward the elevator and I pressed the button. From somewhere down the hall, behind a door on the right, I heard voices. Low, male, the overlapping cadence of people who had known each other long enough to talk over each other comfortably. I could not make out words, but one of the voices had a particular register, even muffled through a hotel door, that my body cataloged before my brain could intercept the process. Cedar, rain, the memory of warmth. Thursday, I reminded myself. He leaves Thursday. You are leaving today. This hallway is the end of that particular story and you are walking away from it with your bag and your dignity and one stolen wedding cookie, and that is the correct and reasonable decision. The elevator arrived. I stepped in. Soo-hyun followed. I did not look back down the hall. I almost did. I want to be honest about that. I almost did. But the doors closed and the elevator descended and I kept my eyes forward and my breathing steady, and I told myself that Portland was a beginning and Seattle was a chapter, and some people come into your life for 40 minutes and hand you warm food and one good piece of advice, and that is all they were ever meant to be. I told myself that all the way down to the lobby, and I almost believed it, with absolutely no idea who was already in it. Portland welcomed me the way it welcomes everyone, with rain, good coffee, and the quiet understanding that people come here to become something different from what they were before. The city does not ask questions. It just opens its gray, green, beautiful arms and lets you rebuild inside them. I rebuilt efficiently. That is the most honest way to say it. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in the Alberta Arts District within 2 weeks. A ground floor unit with good light and a landlord named Mr. Choi, who was 73, Korean American, and deeply invested in whether I was eating enough. I got a job as a clinical intake coordinator at a mid-sized mental health practice on Northeast Broadway, which suited me perfectly because I was organized, I was good with people who were having hard days, and the work required exactly the kind of focused presence that left no room for unnecessary personal reflection during business hours. I made a life, a real one, with grocery routines and a favorite ramen place 4 blocks from my apartment, and a community garden plot where I grew perilla and green onions and quietly threatened the slugs in Korean when no one was listening. And then, 8 weeks after I arrived in Portland, I found out I was pregnant. I sat on my bathroom floor for 45 minutes after reading the test. Not because I was devastated. Not because I did not know what I wanted to do. But because I needed 45 minutes to let my brain fully process the geometry of what had happened, which was that one unplanned night during the chaos of my suppressants running completely out and my entire life restructuring itself had apparently decided to become 3. The clinic confirmed it 2 days later. Triplets. Identical. Omega carrier pregnancy, which the doctor explained was rare and came with specific considerations and a monitoring schedule that was going to become a significant part of my next 7 months. She said it with clinical care and handed me a folder of information. I took the folder. I thanked her. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and stood very still while my body quietly rewrote every plan I thought I had just made. Then I called Soo-hyun. "I'm going to need you to sit down," I said when he picked up. "I'm already sitting. Sit down more." There was a pause. "Min-jae, what happened?" "I'm pregnant." Silence. With triplets. The silence became a different kind of silence. "I'm booking a flight," he said. "You don't have to." "Cha Min-jae, I am already looking at flights." Do not finish that sentence. He arrived 2 days later with 2 bags of groceries, a stack of books on Omega pregnancy he had apparently read on the plane, and the focused energy of a person who had decided that his role in this situation was infrastructure and he was going to be excellent at it. We sat at my kitchen table that first night with barley tea and the quiet understanding of people who had been through things together before and knew how to be honest without being cruel. "The father," Soo-hyun said carefully, "is not in the picture," I said, "and is not going to be." Soo-hyun looked at me, not questioning, not pushing, reading. "Was it someone you wanted to be?" he asked. I thought about that for longer than a simple question should have required. "No," I said finally, and I meant it, not as bitterness, not as protection, just as the clean, unambiguous truth of a person who knew their own heart well enough to read it accurately. Soo-hyun nodded. He wrapped both hands around his tea. "Okay," he said. "Okay." The same word, the same simple acceptance, and I pushed down the small echo it carried and focused on the tea and the present and the very practical future that needed building. I did not think about cedar and rain. I made a firm policy of it. My sons were born 7 months later on a Tuesday in March, during a rainstorm that the nurses said was the worst Portland had seen that winter. They arrived in order 12 minutes between the first and the last, each of them announcing their presence with the specific indignant volume of people who had opinions about their arrival conditions. I named them Cha Ji-won, Cha Ji-ho, and Cha Ji-hoon. Ji-won came first, quiet and watchful, dark eyes already taking inventory of the room. Ji-ho came second, loud and immediately annoyed about it, expressing this with great clarity and no apology. Ji-hoon came last, and the nurse who handed him to me said he had stopped crying the moment he was placed against my chest, like he had simply been waiting to confirm I was there and could now relax. I held all 3 of them in a room that smelled like antiseptic and rain and the specific exhaustion of a body that had done something enormous, and I felt, with a completeness I had not expected, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not where I had planned, not what I had imagined, but mine, completely, entirely mine. 3 years passed. They passed the way years do when you have 3 identical toddlers and a full-time job and a best friend who commutes from Seattle on alternate weekends and a Mr. Choi downstairs who knocks on your door every Sunday with something in a container and the expectation that you will eat it and report back. They passed with first words and first steps and the specific chaos of 3 small people who shared a face but had clearly divided up entirely different personalities from the very beginning. Ji-won was precise and observant, already arranging his blocks by color at 18 months with the focused energy of someone who had plans. Junho was loud and physical and gloriously, exhaustingly enthusiastic about everything. A person for whom the word boundary was a suggestion requiring negotiation. Jaehoon was gentle and perceptive, the one who would bring me a toy when I looked tired and pat my knee with a small, serious hand like he was checking in. I loved them with the specific ferocity of someone who had chosen everything about this life on purpose and would choose it again without hesitation. And I was tired. I want to be honest about that too. The good kind of tired and the real kind of tired, layered together in the way they always are when you are doing something that matters enormously and doing it mostly alone. The morning everything changed was not a dramatic morning. That is always how it works, I think. The mornings that rearrange your life look, from the outside, completely ordinary. It was a Saturday. Early October, Portland doing its amber and cool and golden thing, the kind of morning that makes the city look like something someone painted rather than somewhere people actually live. I had all 3 boys dressed and fed by 8:30, which was either a personal record or evidence that I had finally broken them all into the routine. I was not entirely sure which. We were going to Washington Park. This was not a special occasion. This was just what we did on Saturday mornings when the weather was not actively hostile, because 3 3-year-olds in a 2-bedroom apartment with no outdoor activity was a situation with predictable and escalating consequences. Jaewon held my left hand. Jaehoon held my right. Junho walked approximately 2 steps ahead because he was Junho and the concept of formation was offensive to him personally. The park was already lively when we arrived. The kind of weekend morning crowd that mixed joggers and dog walkers and families with a comfortable Saturday ease. The leaves were doing their full October performance, red and gold and rust, and the air had that clean cold edge that makes everything feel slightly more awake than usual. I found our usual spot near the big maple by the east path, the one with the bench that had a good sightline in all directions, which I needed because Jiho's relationship with staying visible was complicated. I sat down. Jaewon climbed up next to me immediately and leaned against my arm with the calm weight of a child who was content to observe. Jaehoon settled on my other side, already watching a dog across the path with focused scientific interest. Junho went approximately 4 feet away and began an intensive investigation of a pile of leaves with the energy of someone who had found evidence of something important. I had my coffee. The morning was quiet in the good way. The maple above us was doing spectacular things with the light. This, I thought, with the particular satisfaction of someone who had built something worth having from the rubble of something that failed. This is the life. And then Jaehoon, who was still watching the dog across the path, said with the clear, carrying voice of a 3-year-old who had not yet learned about indoor volumes or social filtration, "Appa, that man smells like you." I looked up. 3 men stood on the path approximately 15 feet away. They had come from the direction of the rose garden, and they were clearly mid-conversation, and one of them was looking at his phone, and one of them had stopped walking first, and the third one, the one in the middle, was standing completely still with his eyes on me and an expression on his face that I had not seen in 3 years but recognized immediately. Kwon Taeyang, and Kwon Taehyun, and Kwon Taeseo, all 3 of them, in Washington Park, in Portland, on a Saturday morning in October. My coffee cup was very solid in my hand. I held on to that. Taeseo's gaze had moved from me to the bench beside me, and it was doing a very specific kind of math. Taehyun had looked up from his phone and gone completely still. And Taeyang was looking at me with an expression that was making its way through several stages simultaneously, like a man whose entire understanding of the present moment was being rewritten in real time. Junho chose this moment to look up from his leaves, notice the 3 large strangers his brother was pointing at, and announce with great confidence, "Those are big people." Nobody moved. The October light came through the maple in pieces, warm and gold, landing on 3 identical faces that were looking at 3 identical smaller faces with an expression I did not have a single prepared response for. "Say something," I told myself. "You are Cha Minji. You have survived a public wedding cancellation and a solo triplet pregnancy and 3 years of Saturday mornings with Junho. You can handle 15 feet of park path and 3 trauma surgeons." I looked at Taeyang directly. His eyes had not moved from my face. And what was in them, that specific mixture of recognition and shock and something raw and unguarded that he was not managing to keep behind his usual composure, was the most frightening thing I had seen all morning. Because it was not a stranger's shock. It was the shock of someone encountering something they had not let themselves look for. Suddenly, undeniably, right in front of them. Cedar. My body reported quietly. Rain. 3 years and it is exactly the same. Junho patted my knee. Small, serious hand. Checking in. Appa, he said softly, looking up at me. You okay? I looked down at him. His dark eyes careful and kind. My son, watching my face the way he always watched my face because he had always been the one who paid attention. I took one breath. Yeah, baby, I said. I'm okay. I was not entirely sure that was true, but I had said it to harder questions before, but would very soon. Taeyang moved first. Not dramatically. Not with the wide, declarative stride of someone making a statement. He simply stepped forward the way he did everything, with the quiet, unhurried certainty of a man who had made a decision and was now implementing it, and the 15 feet between us became 10, and then 5, and then he was standing at the edge of the bench radius and stopping there, leaving space, the same way he had stood in my hotel room doorway 3 years ago without crossing a threshold he had not been invited past. I noticed that, cataloged it, filed it directly next to every other thing about him that my brain had apparently been keeping in a very organized folder for 3 years without my permission. Taehyun and Tiseo had not moved from the path. They were doing a very specific kind of standing still that communicated awareness without intrusion, which told me this was not their first time giving Taeyang room to handle something. Cha Minji, Taeyang said. Kwon Taeyang, I said. My voice was even. I was extremely proud of my voice. Jaiwan, who had been leaning against my arm, sat up straight and looked at the large stranger with the careful, assessing attention of a child who had inherited my instinct for reading a room. Junho's small hand was still on my knee. Junho had abandoned his leaves and drifted back toward the bench with the instinctive gravity of a child, who sensed that something was happening and wanted to be present for it. All 3 of them were looking at Taeyang. Taeyang was looking at all 3 of them. The expression on his face was doing something I did not have a clean word for. It was not horror. It was not the particular discomfort of a man confronted with information he did not want. It was more like the expression of someone standing at the edge of an enormous thing, looking at the full size of it for the first time, and needing a moment before they could speak again. His jaw was very tight. His eyes were very still. And his scent, cedar and rain, had shifted into something deeper and more complex. The way wood smells when it gets wet. Something ancient and involuntary rising under the surface of his composure. Junho looked up at him with the fearless directness of a child who had never once in his life considered that he might not be the most interesting person in any given situation. Hi, Junho said. Taeyang looked down at him. Something in his face moved. Just slightly. The tight set of his jaw softened by approximately 1 degree. Hi, he said. His voice was very careful. You're big, Junho informed him. I've been told, Taeyang said. I'm big too, Junho said. I'm 3. That's a good age, Taeyang said. And the careful quality of his voice was the voice of a man who was holding himself together through sheer technical discipline and finding it more difficult than usual. I watched this exchange with the specific internal sensation of someone watching a controlled demolition happen in slow motion and having absolutely no tools to stop it. Taeyang, I said, and his eyes came back to me immediately, like they had been waiting for permission. What are you doing in Portland? I moved here, he said. I looked at him. 8 months ago, he added. Asu. I took a position in their emergency trauma department. Oregon Health and Science University, which was, by any reasonable geographic calculation, approximately 4 miles from Washington Park. You've been in Portland, I said, for 8 months. Yes, and you come to Washington Park on Saturday mornings. Most of them. A pause. The Rose Garden is good for thinking. Taehyun and Tiseo are visiting from Seattle for the weekend. I absorbed this information with the outer calm of a person processing a seismic event and the inner experience of someone whose carefully constructed sense of Portland as a fresh start city with no existing complications was being quietly revised. Appa, Jaiwan said, tugging my sleeve with the focused urgency of a child who had something important to contribute. He smells like our house. The park went very quiet around that sentence. Not actually quiet. There were still dogs and joggers and the rustle of October leaves doing their thing. But in the specific radius of our bench, something happened to the air that had nothing to do with wind. Taeyang's eyes moved to Jiwon with an expression that was no longer just careful. It was the expression of a man hearing something that rearranged the architecture of everything he thought he understood about the last 3 years. I looked at my son, my precise, observant, color-coding Jiwon, who had apparently been quietly processing sent information with the accuracy of a small, thorough scientist and had chosen this exact moment to share his findings. Jiwon, I said, with the controlled tone of a parent who needed 30 seconds they were not going to get. Why don't you and your brothers go look at that dog over there with the red collar? The nice one by the fountain. Jiwon considered this. We were already looking at it. Look at it more, I said. He looked at me. He looked at Taeyang. He slid off the bench with the dignified composure of a child who was choosing to comply while making it clear he was not unaware of the strategic nature of the request. Junho, he said, with the quiet authority of a firstborn who had learned early that being first meant being responsible. Fountain dog. Fountain dog. Junho confirmed immediately, already moving, because Junho did not require context, only momentum. Jihoon got down from the bench last. He looked up at Taeyang once with those careful, feeling eyes, and then he looked at me, and he patted my knee one more time before he walked away. My chest did something complicated. I watched them cross the path to the fountain. Junho arrived first. Jiwon was 3 steps behind. Jihoon walked steadily in the middle and I kept them in my peripheral vision because that is where they lived, in the permanent warm periphery of everything I did. Every room I entered, every breath I took. Then I looked at Taeyang. He was watching them walk away with an expression that was completely unguarded now. Whatever composure he had been maintaining, the careful, managed stillness I remembered from 3 years ago, had developed a significant crack, and through it something was showing that I was not sure he knew was visible. He sat down on the bench, not asking, not waiting for permission this time, just sitting because I think his legs had reached a point of structural negotiation. I let him. How old? He said. Came out very quiet. 3, I said. They turned 3 in March. He did the math. I watched him do it. I watched the exact moment the calculation completed, because something changed in his breathing, a subtle deepening, the specific physiological response of a body receiving information that is too large to process quietly. Min-jae, he said. Don't, I said, not unkindly, just clearly. Don't ask me the question you're about to ask me in a park with my children 15 feet away and your brothers standing on the path. That is not a park bench conversation. He closed his mouth. His hands, I noticed, were resting on his knees. They were very still, the kind of still that requires active maintenance. Are you going to tell me I'm wrong? He said after a moment. Not a question exactly. More like a man offering me a door he was not sure he wanted me to take. I looked at him directly. No, I said. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. The October light came through the maple and landed on his face, and I watched 3 years of something move through his expression in the space of 4 seconds. Not guilt, not yet. Something more primary than guilt. The specific, undeniable weight of a truth that had been existing in the world without your knowledge and was now standing 15 feet away by a fountain with a red-collar dog, wearing your face in miniature, 3 times over. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't know, I said. I would have. Taeyang. I said his name the way you say something when you need it to land and stick. He stopped. I made a decision, a considered, deliberate, fully informed decision. I built a life, a good one. My boys have everything they need, and I did not withhold anything from you out of cruelty or fear. I withheld it because you were a man I spent 40 minutes with in a hotel 3 years ago, and I was not going to build a co-parenting arrangement on the foundation of one lobby encounter and some jick. He was very still. That is not me attacking you, I continued. That is me explaining the logic of what happened, because you look like a man who needs logic right now more than emotion, and I have learned to read that in people. Something moved in his eyes. Not offense. Something more like recognition, the specific kind that happens when someone describes you accurately and you were not expecting to be seen that clearly. You're right, he said quietly. I usually am, I said. It's a blessing and a significant social liability. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a full, almost smile this time. Something rawer than that. Something that was almost a smile but was fighting through too much feeling to fully surface. Across the path, Junho had apparently introduced himself to the dog's owner with great confidence and was now attempting to explain something at length. Jiwon was watching with the expression of a sibling who was prepared to apologize on his brother's behalf if necessary. Jaehoon was patting the dog with focused, gentle hands. Taeyang was watching them. I let him, because there was no gentle way to do this and no version of this morning that was not going to cost something, and the least I could offer was the space to look without having to manage his reaction simultaneously. They have your eyes, I said. Came out quieter than I intended. All three of them. And your stillness. Jiwon especially. He arranges things by category. He's been doing it since he could reach a flat surface. Taeyang made a sound. Very low, very brief. The sound of something that had nowhere to go. Junho has your jaw, I continued, because I had apparently decided that today was the day for complete honesty and I was going to commit to it. And absolutely none of your composure, before you get hopeful about that. And the third one, Taeyang said. His voice was not entirely steady. Jaehoon. I watched my youngest guide his brothers gently away from the dog when he sensed the owner needed space. He feels things before he understands them. He always knows when someone in the room needs checking on. I paused. I have no idea where he got that from. Taeyang looked at me. I do, he said. The maple dropped another leaf. It landed on the bench between us, amber and exact, and neither of us moved it. Down the path, Taehyun and Tiseo had drifted closer. Not intrusively. Just within range, the quiet gravitational pull of brothers who sensed that something significant was happening and wanted to be proximate without being intrusive. Tiseo caught my eye. He did not smile this time. He just looked at me with something steady and serious that was different from the pleasant, slightly amused man I remembered from a hotel lobby, and he gave a very small nod. I did not know exactly what the nod meant, but it felt like acknowledgement. I need to think, I said to Taeyang, and you need to think. And neither of us should do it on a park bench while our children, your words about that can come later, are interacting with a stranger's golden retriever. Our children, he said, quietly, testing the shape of the words. I said what I said. I told him, I'm not walking it back. But what it means going forward is a conversation that requires more than a Saturday morning and a maple tree. He nodded. Once. Clean. Can I give you my number? He said. You could have given me your number 3 years ago in a hotel lobby, I pointed out. I know, he said. And there was something in those 2 words that carried the weight of 3 years of a different kind. His own version of a life that had kept moving while something remained unresolved at the edges of it. I pulled out my phone. He gave me his number. I texted him a single period so he would have mine. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He did not take it out. He just sat there for one more moment, looking at his hands, then across at the fountain where 3 small people were beginning to drift back toward the bench with the instinctive homing of children who had given us as much time as their attention spans would allow. Junho arrived first, naturally, climbing onto the bench between us without any regard for the emotional complexity of the space he was occupying. The dog's name is Bomi, he announced. She's 4. That's old. That is old, Taeyang said, with the careful, genuine quality of a man talking to his son for the first time and knowing it, carrying it, and choosing to be present in it anyway. Junho looked at him with 3-year-old directness. What's your name? Taeyang glanced at me, just for a second. The question behind the question visible in his eyes. I gave him nothing, not permission and not prohibition, because that was not my call to make alone, and I was not going to make it in a park, and I was also not going to make it as though 3 years of a life had no weight. Taeyang, he said. Taeyang, Junho repeated, trying the syllables. He seemed to find them acceptable. Okay. He turned to look at the fountain again, satisfied, the way children are satisfied when they have gathered the information they needed and can now move on. Jiwon had stopped at the edge of the bench and was looking at Taeyang with that quiet, measuring gaze. Taking inventory. Filing it. Jihoon stood next to me and leaned against my arm, and then he looked at Taeyang with those feeling eyes, and he said nothing, just looked, with the specific quality of a child who understood more than he had words for. Taeyang looked back at him, and something in his expression, the careful composure, the technical management, the 3 years deep stillness of a man who had learned to hold things quietly, began, very slowly, very visibly, to come apart at the edges. He pressed his mouth together, looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up. His eyes, when they met mine over Jihoon's head, were not steady anymore. "I need a minute," he said, very quietly. "Take it," I said, equally quiet. He stood, walked a few steps down the path, far enough for privacy, not far enough to disappear. His back was to us and I could see the set of his shoulders, the slow breath he took, the way his hands moved briefly to his face before dropping back to his sides. Taehyun appeared beside me without announcement and sat in the vacated bench space with the calm of someone who had done this before, occupied a space that needed holding while his brother handled something large. "He's been in Portland for 8 months, Taehyun said conversationally, watching his brother's back. "I heard," I said. "He goes to this park most Saturdays." "Also heard." He never told us why he specifically chose OHSU when he had 3 other offers. He paused. "I think maybe he didn't know why himself." I looked at Taehyun. His profile was Taeyang's profile, same jaw, same dark eyes, but his energy was different, more open, the kind of person who processed things out loud rather than in the contained privacy of their own chest. "Don't," I said, not unkindly. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "You're building a narrative," I said. "You're a neurosurgeon. You understand pattern recognition and you're applying it to a situation that is still in progress and I need you to let it be in progress." Taehyun looked at me. Then he smiled, small and genuine. "He said you were sharp," he said. Something moved in my chest at that. Small and involuntary. "He talked about me," I said. Not a question. "Not quite." Taehyun looked at the fountain. "He doesn't talk about much," he said, which is its own kind of answer. Down the path, Taeyang turned around. He had composed himself, mostly, the technical management back in place. But something was different about the set of it now. Less like a wall and more like a hand pressed carefully over something still tender. He walked back. He stopped in front of the bench and looked at me with the clear, direct honesty of a man who had made a decision on the path and was now going to say it plainly. "I want to do this right," he said. "Whatever that looks like. Whatever pace you need. I want to do it right." The October morning sat around us, gold and cool and patient. My boys were on the bench. Junho was explaining something to Tizio who had appeared silently on the other end. Jiwon was watching a leaf fall with scientific interest. Jihoon was still leaning against my arm, warm and steady. I looked at Kwon Taeyang standing in Washington Park with the October light on his face and 3 years of something unresolved in his eyes, and I made a decision that was not about forgetting or forgiving or falling, not yet, but about something more foundational than all of those. "Coffee," I said. "Not today. This week. Somewhere neutral. We talk. We figure out what right looks like before we decide if we can do it." He nodded. "Yes." "And Taeyang." "Yes." "If you hurt them," I said quietly and completely without drama, because I did not need drama to mean something absolutely, "I will make whatever Junho felt in that ballroom look like a minor inconvenience." He held my gaze. "Understood," he said, and he meant it. "Good," I said. Junho tugged Taeyang's sleeve. "Are you coming to the fountain?" he asked. "Bomi might still be there." Taeyang looked at me one more time. I tilted my head slightly. Allowing. Not inviting. Allowing. He looked down at Junho. And for the first time since he crossed those 15 feet, something in his face lost the weight of 3 years entirely. Just briefly, just for a moment, and what was underneath it was something I had not expected. Relief. Clean and quiet and real. "Yeah," he said to my son. "I'll come." And maybe, just maybe, that terrified me more than anything that had happened yet. I spent the next 4 days being extremely normal about everything. I went to work. I filed intake forms and answered phones and helped 3 separate clients navigate insurance paperwork with the calm efficiency of someone whose internal landscape was not currently under significant reconstruction. I picked my boys up from daycare at 5:30 every evening. I made dinner. I did the bath and the books and the specific negotiation that bedtime required when 3 people with identical faces had 3 entirely different opinions about which story came first. I texted Soo-hyun on Tuesday night. He's in Portland, I sent. Has been for 8 months. We ran into each other at the park. The typing indicator appeared immediately, which meant Soo-hyun had been waiting for this text in the specific way that best friends wait for things they know are coming and have the grace not to say so. Him, he sent back. Him, I confirmed. And the boys saw him? Junho introduced himself and told him his age. Jaewon took inventory. Jaehoon checked on me afterward. A pause. Then, classic. How are you? I looked at that question for a while. Functioning, I sent. We're getting coffee this week. The response came fast. Minji. Coffee. It is a beverage, Soo-hyun. People consume it. It is a beginning is what it is. I put my phone face down on the nightstand. Then I picked it up again. I don't know what it is yet, I sent. That's the point of the coffee. He sent back a single image of a man sitting at a table with his head in his hands that I chose to interpret as supportive. We met on Thursday. I chose the place. A small Korean-owned cafe on northeast Alberta called Dawn. The kind of place with mismatched wooden chairs and plants in every corner, and a menu written on a chalkboard in both Korean and English. I chose it because I had been going there since I moved to Portland and I knew every exit, every sight line, and the exact quality of the light through the east window in the morning, which was warm and honest and did not hide things. I arrived 7 minutes early. I sat at the table by the east window. I ordered an Americano. I was not nervous. I want to be clear about that. I was alert. There is a difference. Nervous is reactive. Alert is prepared. Taeyang arrived at exactly the agreed time, which I noted and filed without comment, and he was not in a suit this time. Dark trousers, a simple gray knit, a coat that looked like it had been worn enough to be comfortable. He looked like a man who had dressed with care while trying not to look like he had dressed with care, which was either relatable or suspicious depending on your outlook. He spotted me immediately, walked over, sat down across from me without the pause of a man who needed to settle himself, which meant he had already done that before he walked in. You're early, he said. I'm always early, I said. It's a dominance move. The almost smile appeared. Still not a full one. But it was becoming familiar, that specific curve that stopped just short of committing. He ordered a black coffee. No modifications. I noted that too. The cafe did its morning thing around us, quiet and warm and unhurried. The smell of roasting beans and the low murmur of other people's conversations creating exactly the kind of ambient cover that made honesty easier. I've been thinking about what to say, he said. How did that go? I asked. I wrote 3 versions and rejected all of them. What was wrong with them? Too much explanation, he said. Not enough honesty. I wrapped both hands around my Americano. Then skip the explanation, I said. I am genuinely not interested in a prepared statement. I've had enough of those. He looked at me. Then he nodded, and the last visible remnant of whatever he had rehearsed seemed to leave his posture. The shoulders dropping slightly, the hands settling flat on the table. I thought about you, he said, after Seattle. More than made sense for 40 minutes and a container of juk. The cafe continued its warm, unbothered existence around that sentence. I didn't do anything about it, he continued, because I had your logic. 40 minutes. 1 lobby. I didn't have a right to it. But, I said, because there was clearly a but. But I took the OHSU position over 3 other offers and told myself it was the hospital rating and the department structure. He paused. Taehyun asked me last night if I had been honest with myself about why. I told him the hospital rating and the department structure. Another pause. He laughed for approximately 40 seconds. I looked at my Americano. Do not, I told my chest firmly. do not find that endearing. We are gathering information, not collecting feelings. Stay focused. My chest submitted a formal objection and continued exactly as it pleased. Portland is a big city, I said. You had no way of knowing I was here. No, he agreed. But I knew you'd recommended it. And I knew you were the kind of person who follows through on what they say they're going to do. He met my eyes. I didn't think I was looking for you. I think I just didn't close the door all the way. The east window light was doing exactly what I knew it would do, warm and direct, landing on the table between us with the honest quality of something that illuminated without flattering. Taeyang, I said. Yes. I need you to understand something before we go any further with this conversation. Okay. I set my cup down. I am not looking for someone to complete a picture. I have a complete picture. I have 3 children and a job and a garden plot and a landlord who brings me food on Sundays and a best friend who stress reads pregnancy books on airplanes. My life is not a gap waiting to be filled. I know that, he said. I'm not finished, I said. He closed his mouth. What I am open to, I continued, is something that adds rather than rearranges. Something that has the patience to build rather than the urgency to arrive. And something that understands that my boys are not a complication in this equation. They are the equation. Everything else is a variable. He was very still. If any part of that feels like too much, I said, then this coffee is just a coffee and we can discuss co-parenting logistics like adults and that will be fine. I meant it. Every word. I had made peace with every outcome before I walked through Dawn's door, and that peace was real, not performed. Taeyang looked at me across the table for a long moment. The cafe breathed around us. Someone's latte art got admired 2 tables over. The equation, he said slowly. Not the complication. Correct. And variables are what you solve for, he said. Not what you eliminate. I looked at him. I'm a trauma surgeon, he said, with the quiet, precise calm of a man making a very specific point. I don't eliminate variables. I work with what's there. Something shifted in the room. Not physically. Just in the quality of the air between us, the specific atmospheric change that happens when 2 people stop speaking in careful generalities and start saying what they actually mean. 3 children, I said. Identical triplets. Junho alone requires a specific kind of daily endurance. He once argued with a stop sign for 4 minutes. He had points. I work 24-hour trauma shifts, Taeyang said. I have negotiated with people in active crisis at 3 in the morning for 9 years. I am not frightened of a 3-year-old with opinions. You haven't met Junho properly yet. I look forward to it. I picked up my Americano. Took a slow sip. The coffee was excellent. It always was here. You need to meet them properly, I said, separately from the park. In a context where they can ask questions and you can answer them and nobody is performing anything. Yes, he said. And that happens at my pace. Not urgency, not a timeline, not because it feels emotionally right in a given moment. My pace. Your pace. He agreed without hesitation, without the slight resentful adjustment of a man tolerating a condition. Just clean agreement, the kind that came from actually meaning it. I studied him. He sat there and let me study him, which was itself something. Most people fidget under direct examination. Taeyang just sat, steady and present, like a man who had nothing to hide and understood why the looking was necessary. What happened with you? I said. After Seattle. Not the hospital and the offers. You. He was quiet for a moment. I went back to our residency in Chicago, he said. Finished the year. Did what I was supposed to do. I'm good at doing what I'm supposed to do. That sounds lonely, I said. He looked at me. It was, he said simply, and the simplicity of it landed harder than any elaboration would have. And your brothers, I said. Something in his expression warmed slightly. Taehyun moved to Seattle 3 years ago. TCO followed 6 months later. We're close. We always have been. He paused. They knew something was different after Seattle. I didn't tell them much. They waited. They're good at waiting, I said. They're good at most things, he said, with the flat, genuine affection of a person who would never say he was proud of his brothers directly but meant it completely. Annoying quality in siblings. I smiled before I could stop it. A real one, not managed, just arrived. He saw it. Something in his eyes changed when he did. A quiet brightness. There and then contained. Tell me about them, he said. Your boys. Not the clinical facts. Tell me who they are. And that was the thing that undid me slightly. Not the explanation about the hospital. Not the admission that he had not closed the door all the way. Not the equation comment, which had been genuinely good, and I was not going to tell him that today. It was the ask. The specific quality of it. Not tell me about the situation or tell me what I need to know. Tell me who they are. I looked out the east window for a moment. The street outside was doing its Portland morning thing. A cyclist going past, a woman walking a dog, the ordinary beautiful texture of a city just being itself. Then I looked back. Jaiwon thinks in systems, I said. He has a specific place for everything, and if something is moved, he will not tell you it bothers him. He will just quietly put it back and look at you like you are a variable he is still calculating. He likes perilla. He eats it right out of the garden pot if I let him. Taeyang was listening with his whole body. Not performing attention, just giving it. Junho is entirely made of momentum, I continued. He does not walk into rooms, he arrives in them. He is going to be either a very great leader or a very specific kind of catastrophe, and possibly both simultaneously. He has never once in his life been uncertain about anything, which I find both admirable and exhausting. A breath of a laugh from Taeyang. Quiet, real. And Junho, I said. I paused for a moment because Junho always required a moment. He loves you before he knows you. That's the only way I can explain it. He just opens in the direction of people all the way and trusts that the world will be careful with him. I stopped. I spend a lot of time hoping the world deserves that. The cafe was quiet around the end of that sentence. Taeyang was looking at me with an expression that had gone past careful and past composed and arrived somewhere much more undefended than either of those. He patted your knee, he said quietly. In the park. When you said you were okay. He always does that, I said. When he thinks I need checking on. He got that from you, Taeyang said. The noticing. I looked at him. You noticed me in that lobby before I said a word, he said. You noticed what I didn't say in that hotel room. You noticed what Soo-hyun was hiding before he told you. You've been noticing things your whole life and taking care of people who needed it, and I think you got so good at it that you forgot to let anyone notice you back. The east window light sat between us. My Americano had gone slightly cool. Something in my chest that had been held at a careful, managed distance for 3 years moved approximately 2 inches closer to the surface, and I felt it with the specific clarity of someone who had been pretending not to feel it for a long time. I did not cry. I want that noted. But my next breath was slightly less even than the one before it, and I think he heard that because he did not say anything else. He just let the sentence be there, solid and true, and gave me the room to sit with it. This said some honest part of me that I had been ignoring since a hotel elevator 3 years ago, is the problem. This is exactly the problem. He is too perceptive and too patient, and he brings Juk and he asks who your children are, and he says the thing you did not know you needed to hear, and he just sits there and lets you have it without making it about him. This is so much worse than a chemical response. That was a lot, I said finally. Yes, he agreed. You cannot just say things like that. I know, he said. I said it anyway. Why? He looked at me steadily. Because you told me to skip the explanation and go to the honesty. That was the honesty. I picked up my Americano. It was cold. I drank it anyway, because I needed something to do with my hands and my composure simultaneously. I need to think, I said. I know. This week was supposed to be about logistics. I know, he said again. I'm sorry it became more than that. Are you? I said. And it came out slightly sharper than I intended, because the part of me that protected things was doing its job. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. No, he said honestly. But I'm sorry if it was too much. I set my cup down. Outside the east window, Portland continued its ordinary gorgeous morning. A leaf came off the tree by the cafe entrance and drifted past the glass. Sunday, I said. The boys have their usual morning routine. Park, then lunch. You can come. Low stakes. No performance. Just show up and be a person and let them decide what they think of you. Something moved in his face that he did not try to manage. Sunday, he said. And Taeyang. Yes. If Junho argues with you about something completely unreasonable, do not try to win logically. You will lose and it will take 11 minutes and you'll question everything you know about debate. He pressed his lips together. Containing something. Noted, he said. I stood, put my coat on, picked up my bag. He stood too because he was that kind of person, the standing when someone stands kind, and we were suddenly closer than the table width of the last hour and the cedar and rain was right there, immediate and familiar in a way that my body had absolutely not forgotten regardless of my brain's 3-year policy. Thank you for the coffee, I said. Thank you for choosing this place, he said. The light is good. I looked at him. You noticed that, I said. I told you, he said quietly. I noticed things too. I walked to the door. I did not look back. But I was smiling by the time I hit the street, small and private and entirely against my better judgment. And I let it stay because the October air was cool and Portland was golden and Sunday was 3 days away. And for the first time in 3 years, I was not building toward something alone. I did not know yet what I was building toward. But the not knowing felt different than it used to. It felt cautiously and dangerously, like the beginning of something that had enough foundation to hold weight. I walked home through the amber morning and I let that thought exist without immediately analyzing it to death. That was new. That was something. For words, we need to talk. I stared at my phone for a long time. Not because I was afraid. Not because those 4 words had any particular power over me anymore. But because 11:47 at night, 3 years of complete silence, and the specific timing of 2 days after running into Kwon Taeyang in a park suggested that the universe had a sense of humor that I did not find remotely funny. I set the phone on the nightstand, picked it up again, put it back down, got up, went to the kitchen, made barley tea with the focused deliberateness of a person who needed something warm in their hands while their brain ran calculations. Stood at the kitchen window and looked at the Alberta Arts District doing its quiet midnight thing. The streetlights making pools of amber on the wet pavement. A cat crossing the road with the unhurried dignity of something that owned the night. Seo Junho, I thought. 3 years. Not a word. And now this. The timing was not coincidence. Could not be. Which meant someone had told him something. The Seo family network was extensive and had long reach, and Seattle was not that far from Portland, and I had been running into people from that world peripherally for 3 years without incident, but peripherally was different from directly. Someone had seen me in the park on Saturday, or heard something, or the particular mathematics of small Korean-American community networks had finally connected a dot they had been adjacent to for a while. I thought about my boys asleep in the next room. 3 small people breathing in the dark, unaware that the past was apparently in possession of a phone and a complete lack of timing. I drank my tea. Then I picked up my phone and typed back. It's almost midnight, Junho. Whatever it is, it waits until morning. I sent it, put the phone down, went back to bed. He responded in 40 seconds. I know. I'm sorry. Tomorrow. I looked at the ceiling. I'm sorry. That word again from that mouth. It had done a lot of work over the years, that word, and had never quite managed to carry the full weight being asked of it. Tomorrow afternoon, I sent. Public place. 1 hour. He agreed immediately, which told me he had been prepared for conditions and was willing to accept them, which told me whatever he wanted was something he had thought about enough to be patient for. That was either better or worse than impulsivity. I had not decided yet. I put the phone on the nightstand face down. Sleep was not immediate. It was not dramatic either. I did not lie awake catastrophizing, because I had trained myself out of that particular habit during a triplet pregnancy that required all available cognitive resources to be directed at practical outcomes rather than anxious projection. But I did lie there in the dark for a while, thinking about the specific shape of the last 72 hours. Taeyang in the park with autumn light on his face. Coffee at dawn and the east window and the thing he said about noticing. The small private smile I had walked home with on Thursday morning. The first one in a long time that had nothing to do with my children or my work or the ordinary satisfactions of a life well managed. And now this. Of course, I thought, with the specific tiredness of someone who had learned that good things and complicated things frequently arrived in the same week. Of course, I slept eventually. Not peacefully, but sufficiently, the way you sleep when you have 3 children and your body has learned to take rest where it can find it regardless of what your mind is doing. Morning arrived with the particular efficiency of Saturday mornings, which in my house meant Junho was awake at 6:45 and had opinions about it. I heard him before I saw him, the specific sound of small feet on hardwood moving with purposeful energy toward my room, and then the door opened and Junho stood in the frame in his pajamas with the dinosaur print, his hair doing something architectural, holding a toy car in one hand with the expression of a person who had been awake for a while and had things to discuss. "Appa," he said. "I'm hungry." "Good morning, Junho," I said. "Good morning," he said, with the slightly impatient tone of someone who considered greetings a formality standing between him and breakfast. "I'm hungry." "I heard you the first time," I said. "I'm saying it again in case." I got up. This was my life and I loved it completely, including the 6:45 breakfast announcements. Jaiwan was already sitting at the kitchen table when we got there, which was typical, because Jaiwan woke up quietly and moved through the morning with the self-contained efficiency of someone who did not need to announce his presence to feel confident in it. He had a book open in front of him, one of the picture books with the nature photographs he had claimed as a personal reference library, and he was eating dry cereal from a bowl he had gotten himself without making a sound. "You got your own cereal," I said. "You were sleeping," he said, with the matter-of-fact consideration of a child who had decided not to wake me and wanted me to know it had been intentional. "Thank you, Jaiwana," I said. He nodded. Turned a page. Junho appeared in the kitchen doorway a few minutes later with his blanket still in one hand and his eyes at half capacity, the only one of my 3 children who woke up in stages rather than all at once. He made his way to my leg and leaned against it without speaking, which was his standard morning greeting, a simple physical confirmation that I was there and he was here and everything was in order. I put my hand on his head briefly. "Morning, baby." He made a small sound of acknowledgement. We had breakfast. I had coffee, strong and necessary. Junho narrated his dreams, which involved a very large truck and a misunderstanding with a cloud that he described in considerable detail. Jaiwan ate his eggs in organized sections. Junho woke up incrementally over the course of 20 minutes until he was fully present and eating toast with the focused contentment of someone who had arrived at their best state of being. It was a good morning, ordinary and specific and entirely mine. And then at 10:15 my phone buzzed with Junho's address confirmation, and I spent the rest of the morning deciding how to feel about that. Soo-hyun called at 11. "Did you sleep?" he asked, which meant he had been awake thinking about my text from the previous night. "Sufficiently," I said. "Before you ask, I'm fine. I'm meeting him this afternoon. I have conditions and an exit strategy and exactly 0 expectations. I want to be on standby," he said. "You're in Seattle. I can be on phone standby. Text me when you get there and when you leave. Soo-hyun. Min-jae, you cannot stop me from being on phone standby. I am going to be on phone standby regardless of your feelings about it. This is a non-negotiable expression of friendship." I looked at the ceiling. "Fine. Fine," he echoed, satisfied. Then, more quietly, "Are you actually okay?" I thought about it honestly. "I'm more curious than anything," I said, "which is either healthy or a defense mechanism. Possibly both." "Probably both," he said. "Probably," I agreed. I arranged for Mr. Choi to watch the boys for 2 hours that afternoon. He accepted this assignment with the enthusiasm of a man who considered Saturday afternoon grandfather time a personal highlight and immediately started planning what snacks he was going to introduce them to in my absence. I had standing concerns about his definition of appropriate snack quantities, but I had also accepted that this was a battle with a predetermined outcome. I left it too. Junho had named a cafe in the Pearl District neutral territory by any measure, the kind of polished, minimalist place that served single-origin pour-overs and had furniture that was expensive because it looked like it was not trying. I arrived first again, sat with my back to the wall facing the door, ordered a plain green tea, and waited. He came in at 2:03. 3 years had moved through Junho in ways that were visible if you knew what to look for. He was still put together, still carried himself with the particular posture of someone raised to occupy space confidently. But something had settled differently in his face, a quality around the eyes that was less like the composure of a man in control and more like the composure of a man who had made peace with something difficult and was still carrying the weight of having had to. He saw me, crossed the cafe, sat down. We looked at each other for a moment with the specific assessment of two people taking inventory after years of absence. "You look good," he said. "I know," I said. Something flickered across his face. Almost a smile. "Not quite." "Still you," he said quietly. "Always," I said. "You said we needed to talk." "Clock is running, Junho." He wrapped his hands around the menu he was not reading. "Till I remembered." Junho held things when he was working up to something. "My mother," he said. I waited. "She contacted someone in Portland 2 weeks ago," he said. "A family connection. She found out about the children." There it was. I kept my face even and my breathing steady, and I took a slow sip of green tea while I arranged exactly what I wanted to say and in what order. "Your mother," I said, "has been aware of the existence of my children for 2 weeks, and the first I'm hearing about this is a text at midnight on Friday. I found out 4 days ago," he said, "when she told me she was considering reaching out to you directly. I told her she would not be doing that." I looked at him. "She wanted to discuss the family name," he said, and the slight tightening of his jaw told me everything about how that conversation had gone and what he thought of the premise. I shut it down. Completely. "That is not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I had not expected. "To apologize," he said. "Properly. Not a text. Not 3 lines of carefully worded sorry that's more about my conscience than your experience. I should have done it 3 years ago, and I didn't because I was a coward about it, and you deserved better." The cafe made its gentle pour-over sounds around that sentence. I sat with it. Not performing consideration, actually sitting with it, because Junho had said a lot of things to me over 2 years and most of them had been carefully calibrated. But this did not feel calibrated. It felt like something he had worked up to and was delivering without the safety of preparation. "The man from your firm," I said. He stilled. "Are you still with him?" I said. "Yes," he said quietly. 2 years. "It's serious." I nodded. Something settled in me at that, not painfully. More like the final placement of a piece that had been sitting slightly wrong for 3 years and was now correctly aligned. "Good," I said, and I meant it with complete sincerity. "I mean that. I'm glad you have something real." He looked at me with an expression that carried a specific kind of guilt, the kind that does not dissolve with time but becomes more clearly shaped by it. "I handled everything wrong," he said. "The way I ended it. The altar, Minji. You had picked those flowers yourself, and I knew that, and I still..." He stopped. "There was no version of what I did that was fair to you." "No," I agreed. "There wasn't." "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it. For the altar. For not being honest earlier. For what my mother did. Even though it wasn't my action. It was my family, and I didn't protect you from it well enough while we were together." I looked at him for a long moment. This was the apology I had not known I was waiting for. Not because I needed it to move forward, I had moved forward comprehensively on my own, but because there is a difference between closing a door yourself and having someone finally acknowledge that it needed closing. "Thank you," I said, and I meant that too. He exhaled. Something in his posture shifted. The weight of a long-held thing put down. "The children," he said. "Are they well?" "They're exceptional," I said, without hesitation or modesty. "Are they happy?" "Unreasonably," I said. "Especially Junho, who approaches happiness the way he approaches everything. At full volume with no breaks." Something moved in Junho's eyes. Not claim. Not the Seo family name or the family connection or any of the complicated architecture his mother had apparently been building in his absence. Just something human. "I'm glad," he said simply. "Your mother," I said. "Will not be contacting you," he said firmly. I've made that clear. Whatever she thinks she has a claim to, she doesn't. Those are your children, Minjae. That was your choice and your life, and she has no standing in it. I studied him. You mean that? I said. I do, he said. I should have been better at meaning things like that when it counted. I'm trying to be better at it now. I picked up my green tea. We're not going to be friends, I said plainly. That's not what this is. But I can accept this conversation as the thing it is, which is two people handling old business like adults. That's more than I deserve, he said. Probably, I said. But I'm not in the business of giving people less than they need to move forward. Even people who left me holding chrysanthemums at an altar. He flinched. Small, genuine. I am going to tell you one more thing, I said. And then I'm going to leave. He looked at me. Your mother's network found out about my children, I said. Which means information travels. If she or anyone connected to her attempts to insert themselves into my children's lives, in any form, through any channel, I will respond with the full and specific force of someone who has spent 3 years building a life they will not allow to be disrupted. I set my cup down. I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you. There's a difference. I understand, he said. Good. I stood. Put my coat on. Take care of yourself, Junho. I mean that. He looked up at me from the table, and for a moment I saw him clearly, not as the ghost of a bad decision or the protagonist of my worst morning, but as a person who had made choices poorly and was living in the honest aftermath of them. You too, Minji, he said quietly. You always deserved someone who chose you first. I walked out. The Pearl District was doing its Saturday afternoon thing, clean and bright, the kind of street that looked like an establishing shot. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and took a slow breath of cool Portland air. 3 years, I thought. Done. Not forgotten. Not erased. Just done, the way things are done when they have been handled completely and can now occupy their correct historical position without bleeding into the present. I texted Soohyun. Leaving now. I'm fine. Actually fine, not Minji fine. He responded in 10 seconds. I need a full debrief. Later, I sent. I have somewhere to be tomorrow. 3 bubbles appeared and stayed for a long time. Then, Sunday. The park. Taeyang. Yes, I sent. His response was a single Korean character that translated roughly to an extremely undignified sound of emotional excitement, which I chose to receive as supportive. I started walking. 2 blocks from the cafe, my phone buzzed again. Not Soohyun. Taeyang. Still Sunday? No pressure if anything changed. I stopped walking. He had no way of knowing about this afternoon. He had sent that independently with the simple checking in quality of a man who had said he wanted to do things right and was doing exactly that, quietly and without drama. Still Sunday, I sent back. Same time. Bring a good jacket, Jiho will want to go to the fountain and he has no concept of cold. The response came after a moment. Noted. See you then. I put my phone in my pocket and stood on a Pearl District sidewalk in the October afternoon with something moving through my chest that was warm and complicated and real. The apology from the past. The text from something that might be a future. And in between them, 3 small people in an apartment 4 miles away being introduced to Mr. Choi's theory of appropriate snack quantities. My life, I thought, with full awareness of its complicated, beautiful, specifically mine texture. This is my life. And then my phone buzzed one more time. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. Portland area code. The text said, Mr. Cha. This is Han Jung-suk, Junho's mother. I think it's time we met to discuss your children's future. I believe we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone. I stood very still on the sidewalk. The October air had gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Arrangement, she had written. Like my children were a business proposal. Like 3 years of a life I had built with everything I had was a negotiating position. My hand was very steady on the phone. There it was, I thought. The real complication. Not Junho, who had surprised me with his honesty. Not Taeyang, who was showing up with good faith and a willingness to learn. But this. The specific, cold architecture of a woman who believed that wealth and family name were a form of claim. She had picked the wrong person to send that to. She had absolutely picked the wrong person. and Han Jung-suk was about to find out exactly what kind of omega she had sent that text to. Sunday morning arrived the way good things sometimes do, quietly, without announcement, with the particular quality of light that October saves for its best days. Pale gold through the curtains, clean cold air coming under the window I had left cracked the night before, the smell of Portland morning doing its amber and damp and coffee from somewhere nearby thing. I lay in bed for exactly 4 minutes enjoying the silence before Junho ended it. Appa. I'm awake, Junho. I had a dream about a dinosaur and a bus. Was it a good dream? A pause while he considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. The bus was late, he concluded. So no. I got up. The morning routine ran its course with the familiar texture of a Saturday that had decided to show up on a Sunday. Cereal and eggs and Jaiwan reading at the table and Jihoon leaning against my leg in stages of incremental awakening. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street below and thought about the 2 things I needed to handle today in the correct order. First thing first. I picked up my phone and opened Han Jung-suk's text. I had composed my response in my head last night with the focused clarity of someone who had slept on it deliberately rather than reacting in the immediate heat of receiving it. I typed it now, clean and without revision because it did not need revision. Mrs. Han. I received your message. I want to be direct with you, because I think directness is more respectful than the alternative. My children are not a discussion point. They are not a future to be arranged. They are not a negotiation. There is no arrangement that benefits everyone, because the only everyone that matters in their lives is the one I decide. If you contact me again on this subject, I will forward your messages to a family attorney and proceed accordingly. I wish you well. This is the only response you will receive. I read it once, sent it, put the phone down, picked it up again because I was human and waited. The 3 dots appeared for a long moment. Then they disappeared. No response came. Good. I made a second coffee and felt the specific satisfaction of a person who had handled something completely and could now close that folder and put it in its correct historical position next to the other things that were done. Soo-hyun called at 9. Did you sleep? He asked. I did, I said. I saw the typing indicator on your phone at midnight. I was composing a response to Han Jung-suk. A pause. What did you say? I read it to him. The silence on his end was the particular silence of someone experiencing strong emotions and choosing to process them quietly. Cha Min-jae, he said finally. Yes. You are the most composed, terrifying person I have ever known, and I mean that as the highest form of love. I know you do, I said. Is today still happening? Today is still happening, I said. Han Jung-suk does not get to rearrange my Sunday. And you're okay. I looked at my kitchen. Jaiwan at the table. Junho now explaining something at length to a toy car. Jihoon wandering in from the hallway with his blanket and his morning stages still in progress. I'm good, I said, and I meant it with the complete, unperformed weight of someone who knew the difference between good and fine and was currently in possession of the real thing. Call me after, Soo-hyun said. I will. And Min-jae. Yes. Let it be good, he said quietly. You're allowed to let it be good. I held the phone for a moment after he hung up. Then I went to get my boys dressed for the park. Junho required negotiations regarding which jacket was acceptable, which took 6 minutes and ended in a compromise that satisfied nobody completely but that both parties could live with, which I privately felt was an excellent preparation for adult life. Jaiwan dressed himself with his usual systematic efficiency. Jihoon stood patiently while I did his buttons and looked up at me with those feeling eyes that saw more than they were supposed to. Taeyang is coming today, I told them. Not as a production. Just as information offered plainly, because my children deserved honesty in the same age-appropriate register that I gave them everything else. Junho looked up immediately. The big one from the park? Yes. Is he bringing Bomi? Bomi belongs to someone else, I said. She probably won't be there. Junho considered this. Okay, he said, apparently deciding that Taeyang's presence was an acceptable substitute for the golden retriever. High praise. Jaiwan was quiet for a moment. Then, without looking up from his shoes which he was tying with focused precision, Is he going to keep coming? I looked at my oldest son. His dark eyes, careful and measuring, the ones that had been doing inventory since he was 18 months old. I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I think so. Is that okay with you? Jiwon finished his bow, examined it, then looked up at me with an expression that was more adult than his 3 years had any right to produce. He was careful, Jiwon said. At the park. He didn't try to be too much. From my 3-year-old, who arranged his blocks by color and watched the world with quiet, systematic attention. Yeah, I said, around something that happened briefly in my throat. He was. Jiwon nodded. That was his answer. We left at 10:30. Washington Park was golden. That was the only word for it. The October trees had committed fully to their best performance, red and amber and the specific deep gold that looked like something expensive, and the morning light came through them at the angle that made everything look both beautiful and slightly unreal, the way very good things sometimes do. I found our usual bench. The big maple. The sight line in all directions. Taeyang was already there, not sitting on the bench, standing a few feet from it, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the trees with the quality of a man who had arrived early and was using the time to be somewhere rather than to perform waiting. He was wearing the good jacket I had told him to bring, dark and practical, and he looked like a person who belonged in a park on an October morning, which was either something he had always been or something I was choosing to see. He turned when he heard us coming up the path. His eyes went to the boys first, not to me, and there was something in that sequence, the instinctive way his attention moved toward them before it moved toward me, that I felt in a part of my chest I had stopped pretending was not paying attention. Junho spotted him from 20 feet away. Taeyang. Taeyang's face did the thing. The one that cracked the careful composure and let something younger and less managed show through. Hey, he said. Junho arrived at his location with the energy of someone who had been launched rather than walked, and stopped in front of him with his hands on his hips. Bomi's not here, he reported. I heard, Taeyang said. Sorry about that. It's okay, Junho said generously. You can still stay. Thank you, Taeyang said with complete seriousness. Jiwon approached more slowly, stopped at a reasonable distance, and looked at Taeyang with the assessing gaze. Taeyang looked back without performing anything, without the slightly forced brightness that adults often put on for children they were trying to impress. He just looked back, present and steady, and waited. Jiwon apparently found this acceptable. He moved to the bench and sat down and opened the small nature book he had brought in his jacket pocket, which was his way of saying this person could stay. Jihoon was last. He walked up to Taeyang and stopped about 2 feet away and looked up at him with those wide, feeling eyes. Taeyang crouched down. Not to be at eye level in a performed, look how good I am with children way. Just to reduce the physical distance, natural and quiet, so Jihoon was not looking up at something large and unknown. Jihoon studied him for a long moment. Then he reached out and patted Taeyang's hand once. Small, serious, checking in. Taeyang went very still. I watched something move through his face that he was not going to be able to manage this time, and he did not try to. He just let it move through him, quiet and enormous. And he looked at my youngest son with an expression that was the most undefended thing I had ever seen on a human face. Hi, Jihoon said softly. Hi, Taeyang said. His voice was very careful. Jihoon nodded, apparently satisfied with the confirmation that the person was real and present and meant no harm, and then turned and went to sit with Jiwon on the bench. Taeyang straightened up slowly. He turned to me. His eyes were not steady and he was not pretending they were. Min-jae, he said, and it came out slightly uneven. I know, I said. We sat on the bench, the 5 of us, in the October morning with the maple doing its gold performance overhead. Junho occupied the space between Taeyang and me with the territorial confidence of a child who did not recognize personal space as a concept. Jiwon read his book. Jihoon leaned against my arm. It was ordinary. Extraordinarily, specifically ordinary in the way that the best things are. After a while Junho decided that the fountain needed visiting and pulled Taeyang's sleeve with the authority of someone who had already decided that Taeyang was a resource available for fountain expeditions. Taeyang looked at me. I tilted my head. Go ahead. He stood and let Junho lead him down the path with the focused guidance of a 3-year-old who knew exactly where he was going and expected full accompaniment. Jiwon watched them walk away. Then, without looking up from his book, "He walks like you." I looked at my son. "Careful," Jiwon said. "Like he's watching for things." I watched Taeyang and Junho at the fountain, my loudest child and this large, careful man, and I thought about all the things that had led to this specific morning. The altar and the chrysanthemums and the hotel lobby and the juk and the 3 years of building alone and the park and the coffee and Han Jung-suk's text that I had already filed in its correct permanent position. All of it. The whole complicated, specific weight of it. And here, on the other side of all of it, this. When they came back from the fountain, Junho was explaining the technical properties of water to Taeyang with the authority of someone who had been studying fountains for years, and Taeyang was listening with the focused quality he gave everything, and the October light was on both of them, and I felt something settle in my chest with the clean, final quality of something that had been looking for its place for a long time. "Can I tell you something?" Taeyang said, when Junho had been redirected to the leaf pile investigation, and we had a moment of relative quiet. "Go ahead," I said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his hands. Then he looked at me. "I think I came to Portland for you," he said. "I think I knew that when I accepted the position, and I let myself not know it because knowing it felt like too much to carry without any right to it." He paused. "I'm done not knowing it." The maple dropped a leaf, gold and slow, landing on the bench between us. "Taeyang," I said. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he said. "I'm not arriving and expecting a place in something I missed 3 years of. I know what that costs. I know what being careful costs." His eyes were steady now, the unsteadiness from earlier resolved into something more foundational. "I just want you to know what I'm here for, so you don't have to wonder." I looked at him for a long moment. Kwon Taeyang, who had brought me juk on the worst morning of my previous life, who had recommended a city and not closed a door all the way, who had crouched down for Jihoon and listened to Jiwon's systems and survived Jiho's fountain expedition with complete composure, who saw me noticing things and noticed me back. "I'm going to tell you something," I said. He waited. "I walked out of that hotel lobby 3 years ago and told myself you were 40 minutes and a good piece of advice," I said. "I told myself that every time the cedar smell came back, every time I passed a cafe with good east window light, every time Jiwon arranged something by category or Jihoon patted someone's hand, I looked at the fountain. I was very disciplined about telling myself that." "How did that go?" he said quietly. An echo of my own question from Dawn, and I heard it and something warm moved through my chest at the precision of it. "Poorly," I said. "In retrospect, comprehensively poorly." The almost smile arrived, and then, for the first time, it finished. It became an actual smile, full and unguarded, and it rearranged his face into something I felt all the way down to my feet. "Okay," I said, because I needed a moment. "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" he said. "You know what?" I said. He did. He was decent enough to put the smile back to its regular operational level, but the warmth behind it stayed. "I want to do this," I said. "Whatever this is. I want to do it carefully and honestly and at a pace that works for my boys first and us second. And I want you to understand that there will be days when it is hard and days when Junho is a complete structural event and days when I am tired in the specific way that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with 3 children and a full-time job and a garden plot with a slug problem. I work trauma," he said. "I understand complicated and tired and days that require more than you planned for. And if this becomes something real," I continued, "and I think it already is, then Junho is historical and Han Jung-suk is irrelevant and we build whatever we build on the actual foundation of who we are and not on any other story." "Agreed," he said, immediately, cleanly. "And Taeyang." "Yes. Next time you want to say something that accurate about my noticing things, give me a 2-second warning so I can prepare." He looked at me. "I can't promise that," he said. "Honesty doesn't always come with advance notice." "That," I said, "is deeply inconvenient." "I know," he said, and the smile came back, just slightly, just enough. Junho appeared from the leaf pile with a fistful of amber leaves and the expression of someone who had made an important discovery. Appa, he said. Look. I see them, I said. They're the same color, he said, holding them up to the light with reverence. All three. I looked at my son holding 3 identical amber leaves in the October light, and I thought about 3 boys born on a Tuesday in March in a rainstorm, identical and entirely their own, and I thought about the specific, unlikely geometry of a life that had led from an altar with chrysanthemums to this bench in this park on this golden Sunday morning. They are, I said, exactly the same. Junho presented 1 leaf to me, 1 to Taeyang, and kept 1 for himself with the solemn distribution of a child conducting a ceremony he had invented on the spot. Taeyang looked at his leaf, then at Junho, then at me. Thank you, he said to Junho, with the full seriousness the moment deserved. Junho nodded, satisfied, and went back to his pile. Jaiwan looked up from his book and observed this exchange and then, very quietly, reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small smooth stone he had apparently collected at some earlier point and placed it carefully on the bench between Taeyang and me without comment before returning to his page. I stared at the stone. Taeyang stared at the stone. Did he just? Taeyang said quietly. Yes, I said. Is that a Jaiwan thing? That is a very specific Jaiwan thing, I said. He places objects in spaces he wants to mark as settled. He does it with his blocks. He does it in the garden. I looked at the small smooth stone sitting between us on the bench. He's never done it with a person before. The October morning held that information gently. Taeyang picked up the stone, held it in his palm, looked at it the way you look at something small that has just turned out to be enormous. Junho climbed off the bench and walked around to Taeyang's side and leaned against his leg with the easy, total trust of a child who had made his assessment and arrived at his conclusion and was now simply being present in it. Taeyang went very still. Then, carefully, he put his hand on Junho's back. Light and steady. Junho did not move away. I sat with my amber leaf in my hand and my bench and my maple and 3 years of everything I had built and everyone I had become, and I let the morning be exactly what it was. Perfect in its imperfection. Mine in its entirety. And bigger now by exactly the right amount with exactly the right person at exactly the pace it needed to be. Hey, Taeyang said quietly. I looked at him over Junho's head. Thank you, he said. For the park. For the coffee. For Sunday. He paused. For not closing the door all the way either. I looked at him for a long moment. This careful, patient, cedar and rain man who had let a door stay open for 3 years without knowing why and had ended up exactly where the opening led. I kept the cookie, I said. He blinked. What? From the hotel. The wedding cookie from the tray. I had thought about whether to say this and decided that Soohyun was right and I was allowed to let it be good. I put it in my coat pocket when I left. I told myself I didn't know why. His expression did the thing again. The thing where the composure developed its crack and something real came through it, warm and unguarded and entirely his. Did you eat it? He asked. Eventually, I said. About a month later. In Portland. Standing in my new kitchen. How was it? I thought about that October 3 years ago. The new apartment. The beginning of everything I had built. Standing at a kitchen counter eating a small wrapped cookie from a hotel tray in Seattle, while my stomach was just beginning to tell me something enormous was coming. It was good, I said. It tasted like something worth keeping. He looked at me, and I looked back, and the maple dropped 1 more leaf, gold and unhurried, and it landed in my open hand like it had always known where it was going. Junho came back from the leaves. Jaiwan closed his book. Junho was still leaning against Taeyang's leg, with the settled contentment of someone who had decided this was where he wanted to be. Fountain again? Junho asked, looking at Taeyang with the expression of someone who had identified their preferred park companion and was ready to deploy him. Taeyang looked at me. I raised my eyebrows. Your call. Yeah, he said to Junho. Let's go. And Junho took his hand. Just grabbed it, no ceremony, the way children do when they have decided someone belongs in their orbit, and pulled him down the path toward the fountain with the confident energy of someone who had no idea he had just done something that made his father's chest nearly split open with the specific joy of a thing finally, completely exactly right. Jaiwan stood up from the bench and followed. Junho peeled away from the bench and followed. 3 small people and 1 large careful man walking toward the fountain in the October light, and I sat on the bench under the maple for one more moment alone. Junho's apology, handled. Han Jung-suk's text, filed. The chrysanthemums, the altar, the hotel lobby, the 40 minutes, the 3 years. Done. Finished. Historical. And this, right here, right now, golden and specific and entirely mine. I stood up, picked up the smooth stone Jaiwin had placed on the bench, put it in my pocket next to where the wedding cookie had once been, and walked down the path toward my family. Not the family I had planned. Not the one I had organized seating charts for or chosen linens for or carried chrysanthemums toward with careful, misplaced hope. The one I had built myself from the rubble of all of that, with both hands and all my will and the specific stubborn grace of a person who refused to become small just because something large had failed. Mine. Completely, entirely, perfectly mine. And growing quietly and carefully and at exactly the right pace, into something that had enough foundation to hold all the weight we were going to put on it. Jihoon looked back over his shoulder when he heard me coming. His face opened the way it always did, all the way, trusting the world to be careful with him. I smiled at him. He smiled back. And the October morning held all of us, gold and unhurried and complete. And that was everything. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was the whole story. Like, comment, subscribe and click on the notification bell. Thanks for watching.